This is Mark Lieberman, the host of the radio show The World According to Mark, and we're brought to you through the radio station WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, broadcasting on 103.7 and streaming on WPVMFM.org. So today I have a guest from one of the important news sources in Western North Carolina, Asheville in particular. And this is part of my interest in promoting and getting us to understand who's covering the news. And my guest today is Daniel Walton. Daniel, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. Happy to be here.
Daniel Walton is a reporter. He's also the assistant editor, possibly has some other unnamed jobs, for the MountainXress, sometimes referred to as MountainX, which I believe is a weekly newspaper, correct?
That's correct. We're weekly distributed in all the big purple boxes throughout Western North Carolina, but we also have a website that updates on a more regular basis and a daily newsletter with more of kind of up to the minute coverage.
So the traditional newspaper concept lives. The fact that it's free and available all over Asheville and the Buncombe County area means people can grab it on their way into a coffee shop and use it as a placemat. But there's a lot of interesting things in the newspaper. It keeps everybody aware, at least of the goings on, new restaurant openings, new bar openings, and closings these days. But it also is a solid news reporting vehicle. And in this era in which local newspapers are scaling back, going out of business, being bought up and bought out, it's, I think, refreshing for a lot of folks to realize that there still is this local paper. There's also the daily newspaper from Citizen Times, which is owned by Gannett. And we have other ways of getting the news. But MountainXress has served a unique purpose, I think, as being a paper of the people, but that's just something I invented. So let me stop talking and Daniel, tell us a little bit about you, when you came to the paper, and what you see your objectives in terms of reporting, and then we could talk about the larger objectives of MountainX.
Sure. I mean, I like paper for the people. We don't put it quite that way, but our mission statement is to build community and strengthen democracy by serving an active, thoughtful readership at the local level where the impact of citizen action is greatest. So we're very much focused on Western North Carolina and little that happens outside of it, as opposed to other news sources that might syndicate some national content. As for me, I've been with the paper for about 4 years. I came to Asheville from the Cincinnati, Ohio area, where I just completed a master's degree in professional writing. So gearing up to do reporting, editing, communications in that way. I started with the paper as a beat level reporter, doing work on city government, on environmental issues. Over time, moved to the county side of things and also gained some editing responsibilities. So I kind of oversee our politics coverage while still doing my own work on the county and on some of the environmental stuff that is very close to my heart.
So for those who might be getting this streamed or on podcasts, you're covering now, as we talked about before we got on the air, is Buncombe County, which is the county that encompasses Asheville and suburbs or exurbs or whatever they're in. But it's, even as someone who's devoted significantly to Buncombe County, it's hard not, I guess, for you to get involved in things that are within the province of city government, Asheville. And I think we're seeing also over time, there's an increasing amount of collaboration, cooperation, which is a good thing. Maybe in the past, there was more conflict between those two entities. What's your take on that?
Well, I'll always remember I was at a commission meeting, and the late irascible Republican Commissioner Mike Fryer kind of pointed out the window and said, "Our building's not pink," pointing to the pink marble roof of Asheville City Hall. So there has been in the past some differences of opinion between the county, which tends to be lean a little bit more conservative, and the city, which tends to lean a little bit more liberal. I would agree that there are more places where the city and county are starting to collaborate now, especially as the city expands and the county gets growth on the edges. The two jurisdictions, for example, are working to kind of expand transit services. So it's easier for people who live New Leicester Highway, for example, to get into the city for work if they want to. They're having to deal with issues of pedestrian infrastructure. You've got growth out on the fringes of South Asheville beyond the city limits, where it'd be great to have some sidewalks. That's not a responsibility that county government has traditionally taken, but due to these growth patterns, they're having to think about it and how their network might eventually sync up with Asheville's network. Of course, with all the COVID relief money that's been pouring into governments of all sizes, the city and county have had to think about how each can fill specific needs. So they won't tread on each other's toes in terms of how they make funding allocations. There are a lot of opportunities for cross-governmental collaboration now.
Probably now that you mention it, with the COVID relief money, which is something we might talk about in a little detail, is there is potentially conflicts between, or there could be conflicts between the county and the city as to who should get which part of the pie, so to speak. But maybe that doesn't occur very much. Maybe it's just a question of each has responsibilities for certain things, and maybe they can figure out who gets what, or maybe that's already dictated by the nature of the funding.
Well, with the funding, it's kind of a federal formula. Different governments get chunks of money from the feds based on their population, and they don't really have much of a say as to what that pie looks like. The guidelines for spending that money are also the same across county and city. There's a lot of flexibility, but in general, the money has to be spent on either direct recovery from the pandemic, stuff like testing centers, or economic relief for quarantine, or economic development to bring economies back after the disruption of the pandemic, or infrastructure that would make governments more resilient, adding more broadband, for example. Buncombe County is using, I think, $4.5 million of its COVID relief money specifically for broadband expansion in Sandy Mush, Broad River, some of the more rural areas.
Okay, so let's talk about, again, sort of what MountainXress does to get the word out, and to educate people, and how you handle that. As a person, first of all, you do cover, quote, politics, which would indicate to me that you cover who's running, who's not running, who's thrown their hat into the ring in that respect. And you also cover issues of the day, issues that are decided primarily, I guess, by Buncombe County Commission, which is the primary governing body for Buncombe County, which again encompasses Asheville. So in that regard, just in terms of covering the commission are elected officials. There's also a county manager who is responsible for day-to-day operations. And then there's probably a gazillion committees. And there's only one of you. So how do you figure out where you're going, what you need to do? A lot of meetings are held virtually these days. We're getting back to meetings in person. How do you split yourself into 16 different parts and decide how to cover this?
That would be optimal, wouldn't it, Mark? But because of the limits that we have as a fairly lean operation, and leaner due to the advertising losses that we've had during the pandemic, we try to cover stuff that is actually being decided. At a lot of the committee levels, things are being developed, workshopped, drafted. When something comes to the Board of Commissioners, which is what I regularly cover on a biweekly basis, it's usually up for a vote. And we offer a preview of every commissioners meeting. So if a resident wanted to make public comment during a meeting about something that the board's going to vote on, they'll be better informed about what exactly it is and what some of the context behind whatever the policy or decision is. We also do a little bit occasionally of stuff from the Buncombe County Board of Adjustment, which handles a lot of development decisions, things like approval of very large apartment complexes, things that have substantial impacts in specific areas of the county. We'd love to cover more, but we try to get that top line stuff on a consistent basis, and we try to get enough of advance notice of that stuff for people to be able to comment on it.
Okay, so let me break that down a bit. So for advance notice purposes, I guess in terms of what's going on or what's in front of the commission or some of the other boards like the Board of Adjustments, you or MountainX itself will publish like information from the agenda of an upcoming meeting, and you get that agenda the same way I can get the agenda, which you can go online in county government, and they say they have a dashboard and it's transparent. If it's a transparent dashboard, sometimes I find it to be an invisible dashboard because things that I'm looking for, I have a hard time finding. But you sort of, you meaning you personally, or you or the paper, digests a little of that and lets people know the board is going to have on its agenda this week for its next meeting these particular items. Some of these items are new and some of them are carryover for weeks, months, and possibly longer. That's part of what you do to inform the public so that they know what's happening. And except for, executive session type meetings or whatever, the public could then use that to participate directly in the meeting. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. The agenda for the Board of Commissioners is usually out by the end of the day on the Wednesday prior to the meeting. We'll usually have our preview up by mid to late Friday at the absolute latest, so people have over the weekend to digest it. And all of the stuff on that agenda, people can go and comment on. I'll give you an example from the meeting that the last commission meeting, November 16th. I wrote a preview talking about how the board was going to allocate around $14 million in COVID relief funds. I noted how there wasn't a huge amount of detail at the time around what specific organizations were going to get the money, but I also called back to some of our earlier coverage, noting that one possible project, and one that had attracted a lot of controversy, was using some of that money to fund a low barrier homeless shelter at the Ramada Inn in East Asheville. A lot of residents of the neighboring River Ridge Apartments, the Oakley neighborhood, had raised a lot of concerns over potential increase in crime and quality of life concerns. And lo and behold, at the meeting on the 16th, something like 20 people from the Oakley and River Ridge communities came out unanimously opposed to that project. And lo and behold, the commission did not end up funding that, at least in this funding cycle.
So I saw that headline on the article. So there's an example again where, but for publicity, not just through MountainXress, but otherwise, people that held strong views or opposing views would not have been able to mobilize. And nobody's saying, I'm not saying in this broadcast that the decision by the board, perhaps placating the local opposition, was the right thing, but apparently it was vocal enough and persuasive enough that the board, which could have gone either way on it, possibly tending to approve it, decided, no, we're not doing this. So that's part of, I think that's what we used to call part of democracy, that we still call part of democracy, where people at the grassroots level essentially can weigh in. And so to that extent, again, I don't know who would have supported having it. Maybe I'm guessing homeless people who might have benefited from that might not have had the same opportunity, perhaps, to say, no, we want this. I'm not sure where you come out on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, meetings, that's a question of kind of meeting access, and it's a good point to raise. The Board of Commissioners meetings happen at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. If you're somebody who's working a 9-to-5 job, it can be a bit of a pain to get down to downtown Asheville, find parking, get to the Board of Commissioners, sit through potentially 30 minutes, an hour of comment to talk for 3 minutes before the board and weigh in. If you're someone without reliable transportation, someone who's living on the street, and you are impacted by an issue, it's going to be harder for you to show up, make your case. Many people often can feel intimidated by the trappings of government, as it were. The commissioners and officials dressed nicely in their behind the dais, the sense of the light is going, I've got 3 minutes to talk, and if I go over, someone will be mad at me. The sheriff's deputies who are sitting in the back row of the meeting. It can be an intimidating environment for some people. Buncombe County, it's also worth noting, is only accepting public comment through in-person attendance at this point. The city of Asheville continues to conduct all of its meetings, council meetings, remotely, and they'll allow people to comment by email or voicemail. But Buncombe County is not doing that for reasons that are not entirely clear. The technological capacity exists. So there are questions of access that are worth considering, as especially with issues that impact lower income people who don't necessarily have flexibility to make meetings.
Well, I don't want to spend too much more time on this. First of all, I want, for those who are tuning in, we're talking with Daniel Walton, who's a reporter and the assistant editor for the MountainXress in Asheville and Western North Carolina, who covers politics and other important social issues, including issues that come before Buncombe County as a county through the commissioner's office or other committees. But you made an interesting point, which is to say, Buncombe County says you have to show up in person. In the teeth of the COVID pandemic, nobody was allowed to show up in person. Now you can, although the pandemic is not over. I guess an argument could be made, and one that could be reported on is, well, why not just have it? Why not have both? If people can come, they can come. If people can't come and they can only handle it, through virtual, why not do that?
Well, we have reported on that. My colleague, Brooke Randall, who primarily deals with city government, wrote a story a while back, kind of as during the first time policies were shifting around between in-person to and remote only. kind of asking why local governments were cutting remote public comment. And we didn't really get satisfactory answers to me. I'm going to read just a quote from Brownie Newman here. Our procedures allow significantly more opportunity for public comment than is required by state policy. Our general approach is that people who want to address the commission during our meetings need to attend the meeting. So we're handling public comment in the same way we handle public involvement in all the other agenda items addressed during commission meetings. So we didn't really get a satisfactory response for why can't people who have experienced this taste of flexibility of we can show up in person or we can comment remotely, why that shouldn't be allowed indefinitely going forward. I think honestly, it's just a matter of time, a matter of hassle, and local governments don't particularly want to deal with it.
Got it. All right. Well, first of all, let me correct myself. I referred to you as Waltman, and it's Walton. That's Daniel Walton, and I won't make that mistake again. At least
Sorry about that. Thank
you. I won't for the next 45 minutes. But that, again, Brownie Newman's response is not unexpected, but it is a little bit of diversion as to the issue of if people can't make it there, and there are people that can't make it a lot of places during the day or whatever the timing, and are intimidated by the formal setting. One could argue we've got the technical capacity to let people continue to respond virtually, but that doesn't happen. But let's move to, again, some of your favorite pieces. I talked with you on air, or before we got on air. You've written lots of stories about lots of things. One thing that an article that came out recently had to do with a revision of Buncombe County's conflict of interest policy. We don't need to go over the whole sordid history, so to speak, of issues concerning conflict of interest, except I guess we do. So we'll just say, Wanda Green, Ellen Frost, and others. There were criminal proceedings having to do with practices that misappropriated monies, used monies for the benefit of certain parties, and criminal proceedings occurred, and Wanda Green is currently serving time, and there was at least two other folks involved. But one of the things that grew out of that was, okay, things happen. People, issued gift cards to themselves and others, purchased excess term insurance policies, wined and dined potential donors, and so on and so forth. And that was all bad. And Buncombe County Commissioner said, God, I wish we'd known about that at the time, believe that or not, but there were steps taken. But apparently the steps were not sufficient. So Buncombe County took another look at it. Why don't you give your interpretation of what that was about and how current and relevant that is
Sure.
right now?
Well, for those of you just joining us or who haven't been here for the past 3 years, Buncombe County's corruption scandal is kind of a wide-reaching collection of malfeasance, the head of which, the quote architect of corruption, according to Judge Robert Conrad, was former county manager Wanda Green. She has, as outlined extensively in court proceedings, pretty much purchased gift cards for herself, for her son, Michael Green, took trips to like California wine country on the dime of a county contractor, Joseph Wiseman Jr., many things that did not bring any benefit to county taxpayers, but used county funds or the paid for time of these leading county people. Immediately after the revelations of all of this stuff, the county did make a number of changes kind of to its fiscal controls to pretty much plug some of the holes in the proverbial dam where Wanda Green had managed to extract money. For example, the travel stuff where she and her colleagues, Mandy Stone and former assistant county manager, planning director John Creighton, took trips to California. The travel policy was changed to require travel approval by the chair of the board of commissioners. Before that policy change, the county manager had kind of her own sign-off powers on executive level travel. In another example, the county's purchase cards, the county issued gift cards or county issued credit cards, I should say, that officials can use for petty purchases and that are then charged to the county at the end of a billing period. The limit for transactions was raised higher, and transactions had to get overview by more people. Just simple stuff, really adding layers of oversight that just weren't there before. This most recent move, this conflict of interest policy overhaul, is maybe not as significant as all of that. It's less policy driven and more definition driven. It does add a lot more detail about what exactly a conflict of interest is for county employees. It's 6 pages long as opposed to the previous conflict of interest policy, which was a little less than a page.
Let me point out that one of those 6 pages doesn't really have anything on it. so I'm calling it 5, but go ahead.
In any case, it's significantly longer. It also deals with conflicts of interest beyond the financial, kind of some nepotism stuff. For example, Wanda Green's son, Michael Green, was also an employee of the county and was involved in this graft. The new conflict of interest policy outlines a little bit more about how employees that have family members or significant others also in the county should report those relationships, what levels of management are acceptable and whatnot. But to me, a lot of this is just kind of codifying what already existed. I mean, it's like the Supreme Court decision, right? Graft is like pornography, you know it when you see it. And the people who were doing this stuff would likely not have been dissuaded by a stronger conflict of interest policy. But going forward, this policy does give the county perhaps a little more cover to say what you were doing was absolutely wrong. Here is where it says you were in the wrong, and here is what by policy we're allowed to do about it.
Well, let me just point out a couple of things, or ask you a couple of things. First of all, again, my guest today is Daniel Walton, reporter and assistant editor for MountainXress. And we're talking about one of the topics that was covered by Daniel and covered by MountainXress newspaper, which is this conflict of interest policy, which is a revision of sorts of a prior conflict of interest policy that was put in place after fraudulent nepotism, all kinds of things of misappropriation of money, breach of fiduciary duty. We all know that policies, as you say, you can have a policy, but unless you have the enforcement tools and you have the audit tools and you have the ability to make people disclose and feel the the hot breath breathing down their neck if they move in the opposite direction. Having the policy in and of itself isn't going to solve anything. As I read through the conflict of interest policy, I mean, it's like a thousand others you see, and the question is do people, is there some criticism that should be leveled that this should have happened sooner, and even as a document, it doesn't really provide any confidence that the policy is going to be more rigorously enforced, and that the county commissioners, who presumably sit on top of this process, are going to be able to ferret out bad things before they go too far down the line. So that's a lot of my opinionating, but let me get your views of it.
A lot of questions all at once here. I think it's unequivocal that all of this should have happened a lot sooner. I think, we live in a generally trusting society. People may not have thought that all of these levels of checks and balances and fiscal reporting, which do add some friction to the workings of counter government, I'm sure, were necessary if you had trustworthy people working. When you don't have trustworthy people working, then things break down. So yeah, of course, these checks and balances probably should have been in place earlier. I think what is going to give these policies teeth is the county's internal audit staff. Those are the people who are tasked with making sure all of the internal financial controls are working, that they also receive reports of potential malfeasance throughout the organization, who investigate them. They're the ones who really put these policies into action. The county has had some problems with its internal audit function in recent months. Their director of this department, of the internal audit department, that position has been open since July 1st. They also have no permanent staff, at least as of earlier this month, when these problems were kind of presented to the board. So from the presentation itself, where the chair of the audit committee, an appointed body, was laying out these problems with the audit department, the staff do not have the capacity to complete audits, do not have expertise to assess risk and audit information technology functions. So these are material failings of the county's internal audit function that have not been addressed yet. Also, comparatively, Buncombe County's internal audit function is even budgeted for less than other county governments throughout the state. Buncombe County budgeted for 3 positions, slightly larger counties, but still kind of comparable: Durham, Galford County, Wake County, Mecklenburg, all more than that. Mecklenburg actually has 15 people budgeted for its internal audit. I mean, that's the county that includes Charlotte, so lots and lots of more people, bigger budgets, but still an example of a county that is devoting more resources to making sure its policies are followed. Filling those positions is not necessarily something we can blame the commission for. This is something that county management has to do. I was a little, my interest was piqued when they were explaining why they were having trouble hiring people. And they said, we've had a lot of candidates, but a lot of them are people who have external audit experience, accountants who know how to come into a firm, look at its finances, make sure everything's up to snuff, but not people who have experience specifically working in county governments. And it seems like the people who are filling these positions want that specific type of experience. So they may be setting a little high of a bar, especially in this hiring climate, which is terrible for everyone. And I'm sure county government's no exception.
Well, I want to move to some other areas, but before we leave conflict of interest, let me just comment, and you may or may not have the answer to this. This 5-page conflict of interest policy. It's really pretty spare in some respects, which is to say, it says, for example, there's one section on gifts and favors. No public employee shall accept any gift. Okay, and it goes into details to what's considered okay and what's not considered okay. And then there's another section that deals with these family member employment relationships, which you alluded to, which is you can't be an employee who serves in a position where another family member is supervising your activity. Okay, I didn't see anything in here in this policy that talks about disclosure. In other words, I would assume from every conflict of interest policy that had been involved in with as a lawyer is that the employee is required to make a disclosure on the commencement of his or her employment. And then periodically it is updated. And in fact, it also would say in something that an employee has signed is you, employee, are obliged to provide information that is new or corrects anything that you previously had put down. And now maybe that's somewhere else, but I didn't see it in here.
That, to my understanding, it is in there. If you'll look under the family member employment relationships part of it, you'll see that annual disclosure of any family member and employment and relationships is required of all employees. There's also a disclosure requirement. I think, yes, Buncombe County has made reporting mandatory in terms of consensual relationships between employees, romantic relationships that might lead to compromise of job performance. So those reporting requirements are in there.
So there's a reporting requirement in here, and it's backed up by, there's a form that floats around somewhere in Buncombe County that is part of the HR package, one presumes, that every new employee is required to sign. And then on some periodic basis, if it's annual, it's annual. It's updated, and presumably somebody looks at those, and
that's my understanding.
And the Board of Commissioners should look at them. One would think the county manager should look at them as well. But in any event, so there's a mechanism, whether it's sufficient, effective. If you don't have an audit committee because you can't get people in who meet the qualifications that are set by the county, I would say that's an area that's ripe for potential abuse, because that's where a lot of nefarious schemes can be exposed, and you can't just rely on self-reporting. But we'll leave that as for another story that you might cover, hopefully 6 months from now, or a year. You can say the conflict of interest policy appears to be working very well, or you may find that something crept through, which is tends to be the case, I guess, more often than not. But I want to move, unless you have a comment on that. Do you have a comment on that?
Let's keep on chugging.
Let's keep on chugging. So let's move on to something that's a little bit more positive in one respect, and that is MountainXress does a lot to educate voters about who's running, why they're, what their background is, and so on and so forth. And I think you also give potential voters a sheet or 2 or 3 pages listing out information. And that obviously serves the broader purpose that we talked about at the beginning of the show, which is educating the population to be more informed. Do you feel like that's working well? And I know that that's now going to be expanded to not just elections, but it's going to be you're going to do something very similar for development issues. But let's talk about the election one first.
Sure. Well, yes, as you say, we in our kind of day-to-day reporting, we tend to be very issues focused. We're talking about, here are the people who are currently in office. Here's what they're doing. Here's what you need to know. when election season rolls around, one of our recurring projects is our voter guide, where we reach out to everybody who's running in a contested election for office to represent Buncombe County and ask them kind of the same set of questions. So it's every candidate for the same office has an even playing field. Then we print those responses, and you, the voter, can compare everybody who's running side by side, see where they stand on the issues, figure out who best aligns with your own position. I think it does work pretty well. We actually won an award from the Association of Alternative News Weeklies last year for our 2020 voter guide for the general election. So clearly somebody thinks we're doing the right thing. This upcoming year is particularly critical for our voter guide because so much is changing. As you and your listeners may know, it is the first year after redistricting. That's when the North Carolina state lawmakers, the General Assembly, redraw all the maps that determine who represents what parts of the state for the U.S. House of Representatives, for the North Carolina House, North Carolina Senate, and all of those lines have changed. And importantly, all of those lines have changed, and somewhat significantly, in Buncombe County. So for this particular election cycle, a lot of people are going to be in new election districts. They may not be able to vote for the familiar incumbent that they're used to voting for. They'll need to really reconsider who's the best choice for them. And hopefully our election guide will be able to cover that.
Well, let's focus for a moment. Again, this is something we talked about before going on air, which is we know that these new maps came out. Part of the basis for redrawing districts was because of changes in the census. There was a seat added to the House of Representatives coming from North Carolina, but a lot of the changes also were motivated by court rulings and so on and so forth. So people know these things, but they, at this point, unless they read up on it, they may not even know not only who their candidates are, but they might not even know where they're supposed to go vote. So, but before we get into that level, what have you written about, or what has MountainX covered with respect to the redrawn maps? In other words, were they drawn fairly? Are they going to change significantly the result? We know that the majority of the representatives in both houses of state government are Republican, and therefore the Republicans had more ultimately to say about how these maps were redrawn than the Democrats. And it looks like from a casual reading of what's going on that it's likely that because of the redrawing of those maps and the way they've been redrawn, that there's still going to be a majority of Republicans in both chambers of the State House, unless people quote cross party lines, which doesn't seem to be occurring very often. So can you speak to that?
Sure. Well, it's a little bit beyond the scope of Express to deal with the redistricting process itself. Like, that happens at the state level, and we're very focused on Western North Carolina. So we're not following the committee meetings where lawmakers are haggling over borders. It is accurate to say that the final outcome of these maps was dictated almost exclusively by Republicans. In North Carolina, the district maps only have to be approved by a majority vote of the General Assembly. The governor can't veto them, so there's no threat of the Democrats in the General Assembly upholding the governor's veto. So Republicans can get through anything that they want to. I can speak to how these lines are going to impact Buncombe County. Buncombe County, unlike other counties throughout North Carolina, has kind of a unique setup with how its lines for the county commission districts and the state house districts exist. They're the same. And when the House district lines change, the county commission district lines change. For the current set of maps, the districts have been redrawn. They used to be, for the 2020 elections, kind of like a pie. Think of 3 districts, 3 kind of big pie wedges from your Thanksgiving pumpkin pie, radiating out from roughly I-240 in Asheville, going to the Northwest, to the Southeast, to the Southwest. The way that things have been redrawn now is, let's call it a sandwich, where you have the city of Asheville, District 114 in the middle, flanked by 2 rural areas, 114 and 115 on either side. All of that is to say that the rural areas, which tend to be more conservative, now have more likelihood to elect Republican members, both to the House and to the Board of Commissioners. District 116 in particular, the district that is currently represented by Brian Turner, a Democrat, now leans slightly Republican based on the results of Trump-Biden voting from 2020.
And is it a coincidence that Brian Turner has decided not to run?
I was just about to say that. Stole my thunder here, Mark. But as of last evening, Brian Turner announced that he will be retiring from the legislature. I have not read his announcement in detail. I don't think he mentioned that, I'm going to face a tougher race, but it's unquestionable that he would have faced a tougher race in this new district.
It was to spend more time with family. We've heard that before.
As it often tends to be, doesn't it? But that's not necessarily the case. Susan Fisher, longtime House representative, also a Democrat, represents the Asheville core, District 114. Her new district, her new 114, is solidly Democratic, but she's also retiring. So there is a lot of turnover at the state level. It's worth saying that District 116 is coterminous with Buncombe County Commission District 3. Buncombe County District 3 currently contains the board's only Republican, Robert Presley, who under the old lines was probably going to lose his seat if he ran for re-election. Under these new lines, he has a very good fighting chance of retaining that seat should he decide to run. There has been no announcement to that effect, but the lines give him a good shot. They also put at risk the other District 3 Commissioner, Parker Sloan, who's, I think, the youngest member of the board, almost certainly the most liberal member of the board. He's from, I believe, the Canton area, but he will face a harder race when he comes up for election in, I think it's 2024.
So again, the mission and for MountainXress is to explain what has happened in terms of redistricting and the maps. It's not to necessarily throw punches at it as to whether it's fair or not fair, but it would be, it's worthwhile pointing out that the Republicans have probably gained some additional leverage that they already had leverage because they were already and have been in the majority for, I think, the last 2 election cycles. And if they are able to get a supermajority, they would be in a position to overturn the veto by the Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, if he runs again, which I'm assuming he will. So, I mean, that's the implications of that. But is that something that you think will be reported on? The implications of these changes beyond just simply saying this is what occurred?
Certainly. I mean, we aren't going to deal with state level stuff that much with MountainXress, but I am certain that our fellow news outlets in Asheville will talk about the state level consequences, and we'll certainly talk about the local level consequences of all of these changes. I mean, from a zoom back from the one district that I was talking about, and Buncombe County remains a solidly Republican or solidly Democratic county. The Board of Commissioners, even if 116 were to elect 2 Republicans, it's still going to be almost certainly a 5-2 split, Democratic to Republican. There will still be almost certainly a Democratic sheriff because that position is elected countywide. So at the Buncombe County level, there's not likely to be a huge shift or a flip of the party leadership. The demographics just don't support it.
Okay. Well, let's move quickly to another area that I know that you have a lot to say about, and that is the development side of Asheville, Buncombe County, which includes new developments, the enduring issue of the lack of, quote, affordable housing, the carrot approach. I don't know if there's a carrot and stick. It seems like there's a carrot approach in the way the county and the city of Asheville can approach trying to get development that contributes to more affordable housing, that results in preservation of more historic structures, and so on and so forth. But I think to most people, even people who've come out in opposition to this or that particular development or in favor of it, it's a mess to try to figure out, like, what are the zoning regulations? Are there zoning regulations? What is this thing that you referred to earlier as the Board of Adjustments? What do they do? How does what the city's doing to offer incentives comport with their responsibility to use the money prudently, and so on and so forth? And so with all that at stake, MountainXress has decided that it's going to help people understand this, and they're developing some programmatic material, so to speak, that's going to appear in the MountainXress newspaper. So correct anything that I said that's wrong and enhance what I've said.
Well, no, thanks for asking specifically about this. I'm really excited about this project. It's kind of my baby. We are putting out a citizen guide to the land development process in Asheville and Buncombe County, shooting for sometime in mid-February to have this out on the street. The idea is that, as you said, development is complicated. If somebody wants to build a new apartment complex or a new hotel, they go through a whole web of city and or county committees and elected bodies and staff review. For somebody who may just catch wind of a project that's in their backyard and they're concerned about it, it can be challenging to figure out where exactly to find information about a project and how to weigh in about it at a point where it'll make a difference. That's really what this guide is designed to do, to demystify the bureaucraties of the process, to help people understand how projects move from concept to final decision, to help people understand where and how to best make comment about different projects.
So let's figure out how that will potentially make a difference. I mean, more information is good. Clear information is good, but I guess it's hard to argue with the fact that people who live in communities where more development is going to occur, or even live in communities that are adjacent to communities where more development is going to occur, should have certain stake in the outcomes, because any new development brings a multitude of things. On the one hand, it may bring new jobs, it may bring revitalization, but it also brings more traffic, which then brings more potholes, which means harder to get around, and so on and so forth. And the developers that are seeking to get approvals to develop property, they got their lawyers, they have their study, they have their experts, they got their script. And so even if people know that there's something that's coming before the Board of Adjustment or coming before City Council or coming before the Board of Commissioners, by the time they get involved in it, it's often very difficult to press their concerns. So how do you think this will make a difference?
Well, that's absolutely true, Mark, that by the time a project gets to that final stage, a lot of stuff has been worked out, and not necessarily even behind the scenes. It's often in public meetings that are poorly advertised, poorly understood. What I hope this guide accomplishes is let people get involved much, much earlier in the process. And I'll give you an example. For major projects in the city of Asheville, developers are required to hold what's called a neighborhood meeting, where they talk with the people in the immediate surroundings of the site of their project to get very early stage feedback. This is before they even submit plans to the city. Early stage feedback on what they're doing, what neighbors might have concerns about, talk over some potential solutions to that stuff. Those meetings only have to be advertised, if they're outside of the downtown, to property owners within 200 feet of the property parcel. If you're, for example, a 800 unit apartment complex that's popping up in West Asheville, and you only have to advertise to the 200 feet property owners around you, you're going to end up missing a lot of people who have a stake in the project, and a lot of people who are within 200 feet who are renters, who by city code do not have to be notified of this giant thing that's going to be plopped in their backyard. However, the city has a system that allows you as a resident to sign up for notifications of whenever a project gets proposed. So you can essentially seek out that information yourself, and this guide will help explain how to do it. And I will tell you that when people get involved at early stages, changes tend to happen. I wrote about a hotel proposal on Broadway right next to the Lazy Diamond bar. This neighborhood meeting, normally a very uncontentious affair attended by 8 people, 10 people, had like over 70 people show up to the auditorium of the Pack Library to vent their frustrations and concerns to the developer. It ended with somebody's kind of shouting out, "Hey, everybody, go get your pitchforks." The developer realized that he was going to have a tremendously hard road getting his project through the subsequent stages, that there were concerns over noise, over parking, over congestion, over gentrification, all of these things that would make his project very difficult to pass through different levels of reviews for final council approval. The project never went any farther than that. So big turnout at early stages can make a big difference in the fate of a project.
Okay, so we just have a little bit of time left, but I want to sort of end on this positive note. Again, more information is better than less information. Good information is the best. Giving people the opportunity to participate in policies in their government. MountainXress is doing a fabulous job on that, and I hope that works well for the future. Any parting thoughts in 30 seconds is all we've got left here?
Well, as you said at the top here, local media is on kind of the back foot, but Express has managed to stay afloat thanks to our good advertisers and the support of our readers. If you want to support us, go to MountainX.com and click on the big Support Express button at the top of the page. We appreciate any contributions you can make. Excellent.
Thank you, Daniel, for being on the show today. That was Daniel Walton. The paper is free, but donations are appreciated. Thank you, Dan. Take care.
Thanks so much.